So my topic is a very broad one. So as with Bob, I'm going to sort of pick a number of topics that are relevant to American history that involve economics, and just show how it's useful to have a sound economic understanding in order to understand American history. It enlightens you. It allows you to see things you wouldn't otherwise be able to perceive. I want to start off a little more generically, though, and just say that the impression I got when I was in high school, and that maybe some of you are fortunate enough not to have gotten, but believe me, this is the standard view, is that if you have a free market economy and you don't have government intervention, the result is kids are working in mines and, getting their arms blown off, and everybody has to work like 120 hours a week for 2 cents an hour. Everybody's pretty much crawling around in the dirt searching for worms for sustenance. And the economy is basically dominated by little short men with white mustaches carrying sacks of money with dollar signs on them. I mean, that is by and large, that is the view I got. And I remember going through high school thinking, how could people be so stupid? And not as sophisticated as I am. They don't understand that we need wise overlords to administer everything, because otherwise we'd be at the mercy of these guys on the top of the monopoly package. What would it take to get people to realize the folly, the error of their ways? And so, of course, the standard view is that, well, thankfully, some unspecified government intervention has rescued us from this, and we don't have these problems anymore. And so one of the assumptions is that labor unions must have probably solved this problem, right? Because labor unions force employers to pay higher wages, and that solves the problem. Well, at its height, labor unionism in the U.S. may have reached 1 out of 3 workers at its absolute height. The American workers have typically been the least unionized, or at least among the lowest unionized in the developed world, certainly compared to Europe. Europe's workers were much more heavily unionized, and yet somehow, without the unions to protect them from the terrible exploiters, American workers consistently were the best paid and compensated. We see this in the 20s and really throughout American history. Well, that's not supposed to be possible, right? I mean, that's the opposite of what we're told. How could this have happened? So I want to just start off with a little thought experiment, and then go from there to try to explain how it is that we have grown to enjoy and become accustomed to the standard of living we have, and show it has absolutely nothing to do with government. The only thing the government can do in terms of the average standard of living is disrupt and diminish it. That's all it can do. That it's entirely due to the free market, entirely due to the wicked private sector and the wicked exploiters, that we have the standard of living we enjoy. And so the thought experiment runs like this. Let's suppose all the machinery that we use to produce things is just suddenly destroyed, like there's some mad Unabomber who's got this incredible bomb that can destroy all productive machinery. And it goes off. So we've got nothing. We got to make everything by hand. Well, what would happen in that economy? I mean, how much stuff could we create? Well, not a lot, right? We'd be sitting there with our bare hands saying, I'm not producing very much over here. Okay? So what would that look like? Well, we would have scarcity of everything. Everything would exist in far, far lower quantities than we're accustomed to. There'd be plenty of goods we couldn't produce at all. I mean, try producing a trolley car from beginning to end by hand. You get all the raw materials and resources, do all that by hand. Can't be done, right? So let's imagine, though, we lose all the machines, but we all decide, you know what, I think I'm just going to keep working 40 hours a week. I'm just going to keep working 40 hours a week. Now, let's compare how much stuff we could produce working 40 hours a week with our bare hands, with no machines, no capital goods to help us, and compare that to what we could produce with these machines in 40 hours a week. Well, obviously, in 40 hours a week with these machines, we can produce basically, the abundance we see around us today. But if we've got 40 hours with these crummy hands of ours per week, how much stuff are we producing? I mean, a tiny, tiny sliver, the tiniest sliver of what we used to what we used to produce. So when you get your paycheck in that situation, the non-machine economy situation, you get your paycheck, when you go out to spend it, what are you going to find? Everything's very expensive because everything's very scarce and so is commanding a very high price. You have to work very hard and very long to earn the purchasing power necessary to buy the things you want. Now, would that situation be the fault of the terrible exploiter who's employing you? Would that be his fault? That you can't get very much stuff with your paycheck? Do we need labor unions to get your pay to go up 10 times? What would that help if there ain't no stuff to buy anyway? What if we paid you 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars? Would that help the situation? If there ain't no stuff to buy, it doesn't matter. Your wages can keep going up and up and up. The problem is the stuff isn't there. So this is not the fault of the exploiter, so-called, who's employing you. It's the fault of reality. It's the fault of the fact that the economy is so freaking primitive, it can't produce the physical stuff necessary to give you the standard of living you're accustomed to. Well, that is exactly the economy that people living in the early Industrial Revolution were living in. A very primitive economy with very primitive machines and still a lot of goods being produced by hand. And people are sort of the opinion that the reason workers weren't being paid very much in those days was that evil capitalists were keeping all the wealth to themselves. But the problem was that there wasn't much wealth in the first place. That's the problem. What that economy needed wasn't more government wealth redistribution. It needed more machines so that we can produce more stuff, so that the stuff will exist in greater abundance, so that it's not so expensive, and therefore my paycheck can stretch farther and farther to be able to purchase more and more stuff. That's what that economy needed. Whereas, if we simply were to persist in this situation where we've got very few machines, very, very primitive production process, and just hope that through agitation or legislation, let's pass a law saying that everybody gets a TV set and a new hat and whatever. Well, again, the reason that the workers in that situation don't have TV sets and hats is not that the relatively very few rich people are hoarding all the television sets. It's that there aren't any television sets. It's not that the relatively few rich people are hoarding all the furniture and all the meat. It's that there is relatively little furniture and meat being produced. So that even if we took all the stuff of the guys with the white mustaches and the sacks of money, even if we took all their stuff and redistributed it, the result for the average person would be completely negligible. You wouldn't even notice the improvement in your standard of living. Okay, you'd have an extra 1 penny. That's it. And also, on top of that, there is the moral problem. Stealing is probably a bad thing. But just from a practical point of view, there aren't enough of these guys to go around anyway. So again, the problem is not that somehow greedy people in the midst of the darkness of the night, skulking around the edges of the night, leaped out and grabbed everything one night. They got all the TV sets. No, the problem is that we just simply need more investment in capital goods that can produce more stuff, make the economy more physically productive. That's what happens in a market economy. When you're not looting and stealing and condemning people as exploiters, what they are instead doing, what they're allowed to do, is take their profits and pour them into investment in machinery that makes the productive process more productive, can produce more stuff, and the greater abundance leads to lower prices and higher real wages for everybody. There is absolutely nothing whatsoever the government can do to assist in that process. All it can do is hamper that process by taxing these people, by taking their wealth away, and thereby depriving us of the funds that society needs for the capital goods to allow us to be able to produce more stuff. There's nothing government can do to make this process any better. All it can do is make it worse. Now, we can see this process going on in our lives today. That if you look, for example, at the mid-20th century, and you compare it to the year 2000, so the end of the 20th century, how many minutes did you have to work to earn the money that would give you the purchasing power necessary to buy a loaf of bread? Well, it was 6 minutes in the middle of the 20th century. It was down to a little over half that, 3.5 minutes, by the turn of the century. Because your labor, thanks to the available machinery, was more productive. You could produce more stuff quicker, and therefore your labor was worth more and could command more resources. Likewise, what about a dozen oranges? Well, in the mid-20th century, you'd have to work 21 minutes to earn the money that would have the purchasing power necessary to buy you a dozen oranges. By the end of the 20th century, instead of 21 minutes, it's like 9. So less than half the time is necessary. Or if you want 100 kilowatts of electricity. Now, this is going to be a little tricky now because of this little complication. But we'll just go from, it's our friends, the new wonderful poison bulbs. It's now a bragging point that this bulb says, hey, no poison in it. No poison. You can see it's got no mercury. So let's leave aside the benefits of the 21st century and stick with the 20th. But 100 kilowatts of electricity. You'd have to work for 2 hours in 1950 to earn the purchasing power to buy that. By the end of the 20th century, it was only 14 minutes. And it goes on and on and on. Like a pair of jeans, well, at the beginning of the 20th century, you'd have to work 9 hours to get that purchasing power to buy that. By the middle of the century, it was 4 hours, and then by the end of the century, it was 3. How about a 3-pound chicken, you're all dying to ask me? Well, the answer to that is over 2 hours, nearly 3 hours in 1900, 71 minutes in 1950, and 24 minutes by the end of the 20th century to earn the money necessary that would give you the purchasing power to buy you a 3-pound chicken.